Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with a video to discuss all of the news that CA has just kind of dumped on us on this fine Friday afternoon or morning, really. It's been up since much earlier today. And there's a lot to cover, so we're not really going to waste much time dilly-dallying. I will note that for those of you who only care for certain segments of this, I will leave the timestamps down below. I'm going to discuss Gotrek+Felix. I'm going to discuss the campaign changes in the upcoming patch notes, as well as the multiplayer changes, and I'm going to leave a timestamp for where the campaign changes as well as the multiplayer discussion is, because I understand that many of you might not really care for certain aspects. That's all good. Either way, I do hope you guys enjoy. Be sure to leave your thoughts and comments down below. And without further ado, let's dive right into this info. So first and foremost, we have Gotrek+Felix, or Gotrek+Felix. Not even entirely sure how you pronounce it, but well, a lot of people's favorite duo from Warhammer Fantasy. Definitely one of the most well-known and renowned characters, I suppose. And one that I know a lot of people have been very excited for a while and been hoping that they would make their way into the game. Now, personally, I'm not the biggest Gotrek+Felix fan. Just never really got into the books that much. Never really found them that fun. But still, exciting to see that they're going to make the list here. We will see them as a combination Lord and Hero. Apparently, Gotrek functions as a Lord, whereas Felix is simply a hero that accompanies him. What their stats or exact information will be is yet to be determined. Given that Gotrek, I do believe, becomes the incarnation of Grimnir in the end times, he might be a pretty ridiculous Lord in sort of sheer combat prowess, but we'll definitely see what exactly CA decides to do with them. You're going to be able to hire them temporarily as Empire, Bretonnia, and the Dwarfs. So they are limited in which factions you can hire them as, but still should be a powerful and fun combination. They'll also be available in supposedly in custom battles, as well as, and it's listed all the way down here somewhere, as well as non-campaign multiplayer. They won't be available in multiplayer campaign though, so do keep that in mind. I'm not entirely sure if this means that they'll be available in a quick match, but we'll definitely see how exactly that pans out. Now, there is, however, a bit of a caveat. These guys, first of all, they're releasing as an exclusive for those who have purchased the September issue of White Dwarf magazine. This is for marketing reasons. Personally, I'm not the hugest fan of this. They will eventually be made available on the 17th of October for everybody. But as someone who doesn't really care for White Dwarf all that much, it is a little disheartening to see that they're going to be made exclusive, even if for a little while. However, they will eventually be made available to anyone for free through Total War Access from the 17th of October. So this is much in the vein of the 30th anniversary Regiments of Renown. I understand why CA did it this way. At the same time, like I said, personally not a huge fan of that decision, but it is what it is. Definitely, I'm still going to be excited to see this iconic duo make their way into the game. I'm excited to see what their stats are, how exactly they perform on the battlefield, and yeah, just it's always great to get more content for Warhammer, and that's really what it boils down to for me. And so I'm definitely excited to see how these guys pan out. And obviously, it's not that going to be that long of a wait period, really. A little over a month if you don't purchase. I myself am not entirely decided if I want to cough up the dough for a White Dwarf magazine, but still, if not, you definitely don't have to wait too long before you can get access. And that's really it for this update. Like they haven't really given us any other information on them. We just know that they're a Lord and Hero that you get to keep for 20 turns, and they should be available in multiplayer or customs as well as campaign. Now, going on to the patch notes, and this is really what has me much more excited and much more hyped, because there's just a huge amount of changes coming in with the Hunter and the Beast. It's the Empire Undivided update. Makes sense, because it comes with a massive Empire overhaul and boost. Going over campaign here, like, Empire overall is just huge. The territory now, so the Empire now has 12 new regions. This is just Empire territory, so I think these aren't even necessarily. There's actually additional new provinces being added. So we're just talking new regions within Empire territory. Many provinces have been gotten from 3 to 4 regions. We already saw new regions added to Empire previously. in Ostermark and in Ostland and in Talbicland and those territories, we've seen additional regions added. So this means Empire is going to be a much more densely populated area, which is fair in my opinion. That's a much better representation of Empire and should help some of the issues Empires traditionally had defending that much territory. But definitely it's going to be an interesting change and potentially could really screw with balance in some cases. We'll definitely see how exactly Empire performs there. And that's just one change out of many. There's also 3 new provinces in the Empire territory. The Forest of Lorlorn is being added to near Nordland. It's going to host a Wood Elf faction. Now, I don't know if this is an indicator that we might get, a new Wood Elf Legendary Lord. It would definitely be cool to see that in the future. But for now, we'll settle for a new Wood Elf faction. So that should definitely be exciting. Should also be good for Wood Elves, because now Wood Elves, as they expand northward, they can now get, hopefully, a new Wood Elf settlement all the way up in the north. There's also the Misty Hills, north of Middenland and Solent. And the Misty Hills were added they're also by Marienburg, I believe, so they're kind of going to be a greenskin threat provided for all those central Empire states. And then Solent in the south, which is going to be Balthazar's new province, and this of course is going to border many of the greenskin settlements and come under threat from them. So definitely some exciting changes for the Empire there. There's also been 3 regions added as Empire forts: Fort Sol, Fort Bergres, and Helmgard. These are going to be the new fort maps that we've seen sort of teased previously in earlier blog posts. Supposedly they're going to be more in-depth city battles. How exactly it pans out, we will see. I have seen some people saying it doesn't look that good. I thought it looked decent. It looks like we're going to have multiple tiers of defense, and it's going to be much more viable to use different unit types in sieges. Whereas previously, certain unit types were either completely non-viable or borderline non-viable in siege work. Balthazar, of course, is getting moved. He's getting his own campaign start position. He's going to lead the Golden Order from Feildorf, which means, of course, he's going to be near the Greenskin and have a lot of conflict right there. It should be a little unique, because normally, as Empire, you do fight the rebels, but now with Balthazar Gelt, you will get to fight. You'll have an Empire that can fight Greenskins immediately. You also have an Empire that can fight Lizardmen and Skaven and Vampire Coast immediately. So exciting. And plus, do keep in mind, this also positions you closer to the Vampire counts. So normally, if you play as Empire, you'll often find yourself campaigning against Bretonnia and Beastmen and sometimes Greenskins out in the west, or Marienburg sometimes as well. But now you're gonna be closer to the Vampire counts, so you'll have a new set of enemies. Potentially, you might even want to fight the dwarves. You'll be closer to the Wood Elves as well. So potentially, there's gonna be more opportunities, I think, to expand in unique ways than before. There's also now a new tech tree. It's got reworked. We've already seen some hints of this in some of the Let's Plays CA has been letting out. New tech for we saw it in Wolfheart's campaign, but it appears there's going to be first of all, you don't have tech locks beyond buildings, but it looks like there's going to be much more comprehensive buffs for separate unit types than what we had before, and it should be much more specific. Like you have missile unit specific, melee infantry specific, or state troop specific upgrades, that sort of thing. So that definitely seems pretty exciting. And there's supposedly some unique techs which will interact with the Imperial Authority system, which has replaced Empire offices. Effectively, we're going to have internal politics taking place. You can now gain prestige through winning battles, constructing more impressive buildings. It grants you increased growth, tax rate, and also improves your relations with elector counts. And the idea is that you gain more authority, through which you gain more loyalty from the elector counts, where ultimately they will offer to confederate with you. On the flip side, if you don't have good enough fealty, if you're not able to exert your authority, these guys will secede. And this is an exciting change. This should shake things up quite a bit for Empire, because now Empire is going to be able to confederate much more reliably. If you play your cards right, you shouldn't have issues confederating, whereas before, trying to confederate as Empire was sometimes borderline impossible, because many of the Empire states would just rather die than submit, which is kind of like a bit ridiculous. They'd rather let themselves get overrun by Greenskins, even if you had very high reliability, or you weren't like you didn't necessarily have bad relations with them. They still wouldn't confederate with you. You also can now summon elector counts, which allows you you can assign characters as elector counts, and this unlocks Runefang weapons. as well as unique units, and we've seen examples of these already in some of the CA videos they've released. But definitely it's exciting. We're going to get unique weapons as well as the unique units. Now some of these unique units seem a little mediocre. Some look cool. Some are definitely sort of units with a bit of a legendary reputation, like the Reworked Greatswords, or we're going to see the Knights of War and the Stir River Patrol and all sorts of stuff. So definitely it's exciting to see these guys take the field. And we'll definitely see how exactly they pan out. Political events, once again, allows you to impact. It's just new ways for you to interact with prestige and fealty, and just new ways to build your relations with elector counts. Like choosing sides between elector counts, an example they give here, or you might want to assist an elector count, which is interesting. It's a much more even if you're playing against AI or with AI, it's a much more cooperative way of playing than what we have previously, where usually you just ignore the Empire states, try to get them to get beaten down so hard that you can confederate them easy. You don't really try to help them. And so this, I think, definitely encourages cooperation much better. And gifting settlements will now be available for Empire, which is definitely cool. You'll also be able to install elector counts in Sylvania and Marienburg if you occupy them, which should definitely be interesting. And you can also apparently you can also mess with the elector counts, try to pitch them into battle against each other. Now, to be honest, I don't see the point of this. Most of the time, you're kind of dominating AI, so you don't really care too much. But should definitely help you if you're struggling a little bit and you just need to improve your relations with one specific elector count. In some cases, you might just not care. Like, for example, if you're playing as Empire, you care much more about your relations with Middenland than you do about, say, Nordland. So you might just stack your cards to get favorability with Middenland and just expand and just give up Nordland, essentially. Or maybe you want to challenge, and you might, like, say, if there's these Imperial machinations and you're helping, you might help Nordland instead and have a little bit of challenge there. Slans have gotten reworked. That is another big change, and there's actually plenty of more. But Slan got reworked, so now you've got lore choices. There's different generations of Slan, and this will give them bigger bonuses to Wind of Magic, XP, miscast chance, that sort of thing. And you can also improve their starting rank, which is very important, because before Slan needed huge amounts of... Well, first of all, the Slan magic lineup was kind of crap. Second of all, the Slan weren't that much better than a generic mage. Third of all, Slan started at a low rank, which made it very difficult to improve, to level them up to where they were on par with a skink priest that you probably had for ages, and was much more valuable. You could put them on a big mountain, that sort of thing. But now with new lores, with more Winds of Magic, with lower miscast chance, with higher recruit ranks, that sort of thing, I can see these guys actually becoming a bit of a useful choice in campaign. Whereas before they were kind of a complete joke in campaign, and decent choice in multiplayer, to be honest. But yeah, definitely in campaign they weren't great. Multiplayer caps have been introduced. Now this is definitely exciting. Obviously covers more, is definitely in the multiplayer camp of things, but because it is here on the list, we will mention it. Basically, the unit caps that were made in tourneys have been moved over and made the actual rules in Quick Match, and you can also implement it for customs. You do have the option to not do so, but if you're worried about cheesers in your games and customs, you can definitely now lock them down with unit limits, which is cool, and in my opinion, a very good thing that has honestly been needed for a while, but at least better late than ever. It's good that CA is getting around to it. They're gonna have a max limit from what I've seen on like 3 regiments of renown, 3 of single entity monsters, all sorts of stuff. There's a whole plethora of categories. They are still sorting some things out, and there's still some discussion and debate about certain specific design choices or limitation choices, but by and large, I definitely do think it's going to be a big improvement and going to help the multiplayer meta, as well as helping new players adjust, because now you don't have to worry so much about cheese. And before, if you were a good player, you could definitely counter cheese pretty effectively, but for new players, it was a very limiting and frustrating aspect, I think, and something that was just badly designed. So I think it should help. Now, besides that, there's been a whole bunch of fixes, and to be honest, There's just a lot to cover with fixes and bug fixes, and we're not really going to touch on all of them because, honestly, just fixes. There's stuff that was busted. We're obviously Vampire Coast is going to be able to recruit on the sea now. Supposedly, there's supposed to be a balance pass that should help shake up the meta. Not entirely sure what that means, but we'll see. Supply lines are actually fixed now. They reduce when the player has no armies. There's actually a minimum research rate now. I actually didn't even know this was an issue, but that was interesting. Apparently, yeah, it's actually capped at 5% now. Vampire Coast gets higher hero capacity from final building and hero chains, which in my opinion is nice. They previously occasionally sometimes could struggle with getting higher hero capacity. Skaven improvements at Clark Haran, which I'm not sure is necessary, but it should improve them quite a bit. Non-gunnery school will allow, has been implemented, so new landmarks. Blazing Sun chapter has moved from tier 4 to 3, which is a huge improvement. Honestly, the fact that Knights of the Blazing Sun were a trash unit before, not because they were a bad unit, they're arguably better than Reichsguard, but because they were tiered so high and in a settlement that was often difficult to occupy, that they were inaccessible. But now with the changes to the expansion system for Empire, now you might be able to get an early confederation with Talbotland, as well as the fact that they're moved down from tier 4 to 3. I could see them actually finally, after years really, being a viable option on the campaign map, which is a huge, huge improvement, and definitely cool to see. And there's just a whole bunch of changes. Obviously, some of these are also humorous fillers, like Malekith shed his angry bad guy facade and decided that running on the campaign map is no longer beneath him. So you have stuff like this, but yeah, there's just a bunch of bug fixes, and honestly, I'm not going to touch on all of them. I will. One of the most significant ones is that the melee attack and defense bonuses from veterancy have been adjusted. It now favors melee attack more than it did before, and favors defense less. So it should be more balanced. Before your melee defense would spike a lot more from veterancy. So, in my opinion, this is going to nerf some units significantly, or at least somewhat, but in some cases significantly. In some cases, it's going to be practically irrelevant. In some cases, it's going to be a big buff. And we'll discuss that once we get to the multiplayer section, but it is definitely a big change worth mentioning. A whole bunch of changes. You can get certain specific units actually being able to vanguard when an army is in Astromancy stance, for example. A Grey Wizard will now open his mouth during battle when vocalizing. Master Engineer holding his rifle correctly. It's just largely just small stuff that isn't too important. Cetro does not swerve. His weapon will sit correctly in his hand. It's just not that crucial. Bug fixes as well. And if you guys want to read through those, feel free to check them out. War armies should follow orders more strictly, which is a nice improvement. But if, honestly, I'm probably going to be waiting on greenskins until greenskins get a overhaul, which I assume, I feel like they will be the next faction after Empire to get the coveted rework. Either way, going through bugs. Now going to unit balancing, and this is multiplayer. This is where what I'm really hyped for, because there's a lot of changes here. Some I'm a lot less fond of than others. However, it's a bit of a mixed bag. So first of all, basically all footlords have gone down in cost on foot. In some cases, their mount cost has gone up. In some cases, their mount cost has not gone up. And we can see the different adjustments to mount costs as we go through here. But I'm not going to touch on literally every single mount change. I'm not going to touch necessarily on every single change to a regiment for now, unless I feel it is specifically worth mentioning. But do keep in mind that has been some major overhaulage, because most footlords are now cheaper, and most of their mounted variant, or maybe not many, but at least some of their mounted variants are more expensive now. There's definitely been a push or attempt by CA here to make Footlords more viable. So for the Beastmen, some cost cuts to Beastlord and Kazrak. Morgr getting cheaper is a huge mistake, in my opinion. I think that's quite frankly ridiculous. Morgr is like the lord of choice for the Beastmen right now. And I don't think it's because Morgr's OP. I know there's some people who argue that he is OP, and I completely disagree. I don't think he is. I think he's frustrating in some cases to play against, but I don't think he's overpowered. He just fulfills a function that the Beastman army struggles to fulfill otherwise, which is a survivable lord. Beastmen are just super susceptible to sniping, and yeah, well, end result is that a lord that's resistant to sniping is popular. Papa Gorbel did get a buff to speed and leadership. Now, the leadership buffs to Minotaurs are, in my opinion, not that valuable. Though there has been a rework on Bloodgreed, and unfortunately that's not listed here. That's listed in the abilities section. We'll get to that in a bit. But the buff to leadership, in my opinion, a bit unnecessary. But the +6 run speed is most likely due to the rework on Bloodgreed, because Bloodgreed no longer grants a speed buff. This means Minotaurs are just flat out more mobile than they were before, which is pretty crazy. Now, worth mentioning that the Minotaur vanilla variant is now a specific anti-infantry unit. It costs more, has less base melee attack, but a higher bonus versus infantry, and that's going to make it more powerful both in hitting as well as its ability to hit consistently. So, interesting sight. Personally, I still think it's not going to be worth it. Similarly, Minotaur Great Weapons getting more splash power. I still don't think these units, because of how flimsy and squishy Minotaurs are, you're still going to want a shielded Minotaur. Granted, Bush of Kalkengard have gotten a nerf due to the changes to Chevrons. They now have 2 more melee attack and less melee defense, which in my opinion is a bit of a nerf. The nice melee defense, they had insane melee defense, was a big saving point for them. Though they're still going to be an insanely good unit. Chaos Spawn are now cheaper. Giants are now 100 cheaper. Definitely a good move, given that both units are kind of crap. Ungor Spears were all given Vanguard deployment and Stalk, which is, in my opinion, very cool. They're also a little tankier, though they have gone up in cost. But I think that's fair. If you get Vanguard and Stalk and more HP, at that point they'd be a little busted if there wasn't any nerf. Destroyers of Rakwald gained 8 attack and lost defense. I think this is a nerf because they're a more defensive unit. Same with I have Morslib. You'll generally want more melee defense. Though granted, in the case of the Cygor, the base melee defense is so bad that it just doesn't matter too much. Sons of Goros getting cheaper, I think, is a big win. Blackhorn's Ravagers, a slight drop to melee defense. And all in all, I think these guys should be in an okay spot. For Bretonnia, by and large, huge amount of cost changes, mostly drops in cost for their fighty lords and heroes on foot and horseback. Increases in cost for the prophetess and damsels on horses. I think that's unnecessary. I don't think they deserve this nerf, but you know what? It's not going to be a killer either. Green Knight, Sacred Guardian is now a free non-optional ability in custom battle. I do believe this is his heal. This is his heal in the woods. It's nice. I think this is fair. Honestly, the Green Knight's overpriced still. He's still not going to be worth it most of the time, but at least it is a attempt to take a step in the right direction. Rail Guardians, +1 melee attack and AP damage. I think this should move them a little bit more towards viability, because it'll give them a little bit more killiness. Nothing crazy, but, you know, a buff's a buff. Pegasus and Royal Pegasus Knights got more leadership and tweaked animations. I haven't seen these animations yet, so although CA is claiming they're going to improve things, I'm going to hold off on my judgment until I see that change. We'll see, for sure. For the Bretonian Cav, all of them have had a shift in exchanging melee attack for defense. Actually, all the regiments around, I guess. Or, actually, not all of them. Most of them have. It looks like actually not all of them. The Regiment of Renown. Yeah, I don't see the Regiment of Renown battle pilgrims in here. So they're not getting a change, or Jedi are not getting a change. But defenders with fluidly more melee attack and less defense. I'm not sure how I feel about this. On Cav, it is sometimes nice to have that extra melee defense, just because, to be honest, melee attack, usually you're cycle charging, so you don't really care for it too much. It's going to be high no matter what. Extra +2, +3 isn't really game changing. Though in a sustained fight with enemy Cav, this could be a big deal. Warrens of Montfort, who cares? They're skirmish Cav. Honestly, it's probably a nerf, because if they get caught, they die easier. Questing Knights, this is probably a nerf. Sustained melee Cav losing defense. Generally, defense is what you want, because it scales better in a long fight. And they haven't changed the scaling on melee defense with exhaustion, so it's a bit of a nerf in my opinion, though they are a bit killier. Beast Slayer's Bastion, definitely nerf. A holding infantry losing melee defense for attack is definitely a downgrade. On a holding infantry, you want high melee defense. And the simple fact is, +2 melee attack is not going to make the Beast Slayer's Bastion a better option for really killing stuff. You always bring them as an anchor, but now your anchor can't hold as well. So it's effectively, in my opinion, a nerf. They're just not an offensive choice. Going down to Dark Elves, there's just a huge amount of changes. The Sorceress is largely more expensive now. Death Hag on foot now cheaper, which, given that you see her sometimes on foot, is a bit of a buff. Dreadlords, basically all your lords are cheaper on foot. Though Malekith is cheaper on a cold one, which I think is very much undeserved. But, oh well. I do think the -50 cost for cold ones on Dreadlords is warranted, though. Raven Heralds no longer hide in forest, so that bug was fixed. They have more HP per entity, which is good. Before, they were very easy to snipe. +2 melee attack, -2 melee defense. And that's not really too significant. As a flying skirmisher, they usually don't care about those things too much. Cold One Chariot is more expensive. I think +100 is a little much. I think +50 would have been more fair, but it definitely is a deserved. I think it is a deserved nerf, just a little excessive. Knights of the Ebon Claw, huge nerf. 2 melee attack for 5 melee defense is insane. This wasn't a unit that was really OP to begin with, so the fact that it's getting nerfed like this is really, really rough, and it's something I'm very not fond of. The remaining nerfs, most of these units are pretty aggressive and offensive oriented, so the loss of melee defense isn't really as much of a killer. Bolt Fiends, though, definitely taking a nerf. Same with the Hellbroni. These defensive troops suffer more, really, in my opinion, from these changes. Whereas the offensive troops often just gain a buff because you don't care about their survivability as much. Reaper Bolt Thrower now did gain a bonus versus infantry, though, an extra +3. Before it was, I believe, +8, so it's a significant improvement. Should do a lot more damage with Scattershot now. Dwarves have had buffs to all ethereal heroes, -100 cost, more hit reaction ignore chance, and ability to ignore interruptions. So this is a big buff, or I say it's a big buff, but it's going to be a big buff to a lot of the fightier dwarf lords because now they're going to have a higher chance of getting a hit back in. At the same time, it does make them easier to snipe, which might be a help against rune lords in particular, who previously were a really difficult lord to snipe out and would just be incredibly annoying. The biggest change for the dwarves, though, actually, which isn't listed here because it's in abilities, is Rune of Wrath and Ruin being overhauled. It's now massive slow and does no damage. So I'll discuss that in a bit once we get to abilities, but in my opinion, I'm not the biggest fan of that change. But regardless, drops in cost for a lot of the fighty lords. The Thane actually got a little bit of extra damage. Thorgrim now does more AP damage. He's cheaper as well, which is nice. Mad Uncle Gromby, -100 cost, definitely nice. -100 cost on Belagar makes him a little more effective. Just general improvements. Flame Cannon got nerfed. Yeah, I know there's going to be people saying, but it's plus 65 AP damage and plus 100 base projectile. Nobody cares. Like, literally all these buffs are not what the Flame Cannon needed because now it costs 150 more. It's an artillery piece where to make it work, you have to bring cannons to protect it. Because you can't, as dwarves, you don't have any other tools to shut down enemy artillery, really. So, making the flame cannon even more egregiously expensive, it's not going to be better at killing infantry. It already murderizes infantry with ruthless efficiency if it actually comes on into play. The problem is that it costs a lot, and it was already overpriced. And now it's even more overpriced. So this kills the flame cannon, in my opinion. What little viability it had is gone. Maybe it'll be a smidge better versus cavalry, but honestly, I doubt it, given that the projectiles are so slow. I don't know. I think this is a big nerf, and it's a stupid decision. Organ gun, slight buffs to calibration. Well, the calibration, I believe the accuracy should still be the same, but the calibration was overhauled a little bit. They now calibrate. Actually, I think this is a slight buff to calibration area because the calibration area got smaller, which means and the distance is higher, so it should be a smidge more accurate. Goblobber, less melee defense nerf. Dragonback Slayers, less melee defense doesn't really matter. The Goblobber nerf though definitely does matter. Losing out that melee defense on our artillery piece can be annoying, makes you more vulnerable. Miners got a buff to melee attack, which is okay, but blasting charges now only costing, they only cost 25 more and are going to be more powerful offensively. Again, it's only +2 melee attack, but still, I'm not the biggest fan of this. It's going to make the Empire matchup, which is already a bit cancerous, even more frustrating. Big overhaul for crossbow weapons, and all these quarrelers, and I'm going to get into this a little bit more with Empire, because in Empire's case, there was actually competition there. But crossbows will now all be shooting slower. They have more AP damage, more base damage. So before we had, I believe it was 16 and 4 for crossbow weapons. Now we're going to be looking at 18 and 6. So they're going to be much more competitive with firearms. Bugman's Rangers and Rangers are going up in cost as well, whereas Quarrelers are staying in the same spot. Quarrelers with great weapons also did get a boost in a melee attack, which should make them a little more viable, in my opinion, at being that pseudo combat unit. But all in all, I don't mind these changes. It's going to be an interesting shakeup of the way weapons are defined in this game. Before, crossbows were barely better than bows in AP, but now there's actually a significant change. The Quarrelers and Rangers and all these units will have three more AP damage. They're on par with Greenskin Archers now, which is a big buff, even though they will shoot slower. Ekran Miners also got a buff to melee attack. In my opinion, this is a decent improvement. You don't really care for the defense on them. Norgleming's Ironbreakers, less melee defense. That's pretty much a nerf. Makes them less survivable. Scolder Guard, nerfed. Grumbling Guard, I don't know. It's not going to shake things up. You don't use them too much. Same with PK Guard. I guess the extra offensive stats are nice. Melee defense is kind of a defining feature for dwarves, though. So I'm not sure. Nerfs to melee defense on shooting units, though, are just a straight nerf. Warriors of Dragonfire Pass. Usually you want them to hold, so the loss in melee defense is a bit annoying. Copters with Brimstone Guns got 15 bonus for large. This improves their volley even more. Personally, I think it's unnecessary. I think they're already in a decent spot after the last batch, but if CA wants to go this way, sure, go ahead. Skyhammer, +3 melee attack and 1 melee defense. Because, you know, the problem with Skyhammer is its melee attack and defense. Like, yeah, it's a bit of a mockery, but whatever. It's something I don't care about too much until CA fixes gyro bombers and bombing grids. This unit is not going to be viable anyway, really, in a serious fashion. Dwarf Warriors with great weapons, now more melee attack, definitely good buff. So I appreciate a lot of these buffs and a lot of these reworks and changes. I'm not a fan, however, of the losses in melee defense for a lot of ranged units. It's definitely hurting them. Carl Franz got cheaper on a horse, which is ridiculous. I love bringing him on a horse already. Now he's going to be even cheaper. So my favorite version of Carl Franz is even cheaper. Yay for deathballing. Basically just a straight buff to the Empire Lords here because they're all cheaper on a horse. Do you like your Demi Blob? Well, yeah. Now your Archlector is even cheaper as well. Empire General got way cheaper, but he's garbage, so that's not going to change much. The Empire Captain is now even cheaper than he was before. Warrior Priest is even cheaper than he was before. Granted, Soulfire has been changed. It no longer grants magic resist, so do keep that in mind. We'll get to that once again when we reach the abilities grid. You can't hide in forests with Imperial Pegasuses anymore. And the Amber Wizard on a Griffin now has more HP. Granted, this is on Ultra, so on Large, you're looking at 420 HP boost. Still, it is a significant improvement. It makes the monsters unit that much tankier. So definitely something, in my opinion, that's going to help make the Amber Wizard a little more viable. Sometimes you might just want to bring him for that Blood Roar alongside like Boris to do a leadership bomb build. Big buff. Crossbows were reworked in the same vein as the dwarf crossbows, though in their case they also took a penalty to their cost. In this case, it makes me wonder why CA decided to make the Imperial Archers such crap units when they were going to change crossbows like this anyway. Might as well have moved crossbowmen up, or might have moved those archers' range up, but because they would have competed less with crossbows anyway. But I don't know. Regiments of Renown. Ranged ones got nerfed because they all lost melee defense. Offensive ones got a bit of a buff, I guess. To be honest, I still prefer, because Empire Cav tends to be grindy. So Zindler's Reichsguard and Griffites losing defense, once again, I'd say that's a nerf. Honestly, for most of these Empire units, it's actually a nerf. Because most of them are either shooting units or holding units. Or the Cav is very grindy. Fact is that for Shock Cav, usually I'm either cycle charging or I'm grinding it out and protracted engagement, in which case I'd much rather have the melee defense. Temploff Luminarch, yeah, that got changed. Steam Tank, +2 melee attack, because you know that's what's going to fix a Steam Tank. God damn. It tilts me a bit. Hellblaster does more damage, and it's cheaper. Good buff, in my opinion. It still needs it. Hellstrom rocket battery, more explosion damage. What a joke. The Hellstrom's trash because its arc is trash. And until the arc is fixed, it's always going to be trash. Because it's like trying to... The Hellstrom rocket battery is like trying to use a mortar with the trajectory of a cannon or a bolt thrower. It's abysmal. And unless the trajectory is changed, it's not going to be a viable unit. I don't know. Like, this is just a joke. Demigryph Knights are cheaper. I don't think this is a good idea. As someone who uses Demigryph Knights quite a bit, and arguably an Empire main, I play a lot of Empire. That's my favorite faction. I don't think they deserve this buff. Demigryphs are already very good for the price, and minus 50 cost is just crazy. Outriders and Pistoliers supposedly had a rate of fire change, so now their reload transitions should allow them to shoot faster. If Outriders can actually fire at the recommended or suggested 5-second reload time now, I will be so thrilled. That would be amazing. Finally having a true Outrider unit rather than what we have right now, which is just handguns on horses. But huge buff there. Hopefully. I'm definitely excited to see that in action. And of course, Soulfire got buffed, or changed, so we'll talk about that once we reach abilities. For the Greenskins, they actually got a bit of a buff in my opinion, because most of their Footlords, of course, got cheaper, which is nice. Grimgore now has better chances of ignoring interrupt chance, which is nice. Granted, their shooting units, of course, got a nerf because they have less melee defense. Doom Divers got a nerf. They now cost more. Giants cost less, though. And a lot of their offensive units, especially Crimson Killers, like getting 2 melee attack on Crimson Killers is going to be nuts. Like, they're going to be able to hew... Like, you don't care about the defense on Black Orcs, really. But having more melee attacks is just going to make them bonkers for hewing through infantry at a prodigious rate. It's going to be insane. Definitely hyped, but for a lot of their shooting units, it's a direct nerf for sure. That said, a lot of the Greenskin units had very low melee defense to begin with, so the loss in melee defense isn't as huge of an impact, relatively speaking, because they were already being hit consistently all the time anyway. For the Elves, once again, a lot of cost cuts. Olithanar is a lot cheaper, which is nice. Fireborn and Dragon Princes lost 100 mass. This is because they were inconsistent with other heavy cav. For those of you who don't know, most elite heavy cav had 1,000 mass. Dragon Princes, for some unknown reason, had 1,100. Definitely a nerf to Dragon Princes. And while I'm not... So before there was a whole argument about whether Dragon Princes deserve a buff or not. And I was not fond of... I did not agree with the fact that Dragon Princes deserved a buff. But because Dragon Princes are... But because Demigryph Knights in this patch are getting buffed. Necropolis Knights are getting buffed. And we're going to get to that in a bit. But I already did glance at the patch notes before recording. Chaos Knights are getting a buff. The fact that Dragon Princes are not getting a buff to go along with their peers, essentially, is, in my opinion, not quite fair. I do think Dragon Princes should have probably gotten a slight compensation here. Before I would have been vehemently opposed to it. But because of the changes to their peers, I feel it's unfair now that Dragon Prince is going to be left a little bit in the dust. Lost to melee defense, in some cases, huge here. Like, -5 on the Heralds of the Wind. Definitely not fond of that. Like, this should be the fighty version of the Illyrian Reaver Archers. And they're already very pricey. So this is a big nerf. A lot of archers, of course, losing melee and defensive units losing melee defense. But that's a huge enough. Like -5 on the gray, that's brutal. -3 on the Evergreen Squad Guard, that's not cool. That's a debuff. Same with the Keepers of the Flame losing 3 melee defense. Honestly, this is the High Elves kind of got shafted here. Granted, the Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower gets buffed. And a few of these units did get a little bit cheaper, but the losses in melee defense are definitely going to hurt them a lot, because High Elves rely on martial prowess to stay alive. Their martial prowess is propped up by the defense being usually high, so they can stick around longer. But now all their melee defense can be lower. It's going to make them much easier. It's going to be much easier to drop martial prowess. And I think this is going to hit High Elves kind of hard. I could be wrong. I kind of hope I'm wrong, because I think High Elves are in a very good balance spot, but... And maybe some of you guys who are Empire main or High Elf mains would like to pitch in here, and maybe you don't agree with me. Maybe you think I'm wrong, and I'd like to think I'm wrong here. But I feel like the loss of melee defense is going to hit the High Elves a lot harder than a lot of other factions. And I'm already not thrilled with it on some other factions either. For Lizardmen, Krokar got +5 leadership. This is a very important change because, as we know, Krokar's biggest problem is that his leadership is bad. Like, give me a friggin' break. Why? He's cheaper on foot, which doesn't matter. Mazda Money more expensive on Pelican. I think that's a fair nerf. Drops in price for multiple units here across the board. Salon Mage Priest is a bit pricier. though supposedly with the rework he might be a little bit more powerful. Not entirely sure how fair that will be. Croak is 300 more expensive. I don't think, now granted his deliverance of eats has also been increased or been nerfed, but I think this is a bit excessive. Croak's problem is that he's just insane. Like, he's still going to be egregiously powerful against certain factions, and he's going to become garbage against others. So I'm not sure this is the right nerf. I would have preferred something else. Limiting the range on his spells, or I feel like there were other options. Removing some of his resistances somewhere. Reducing his HP pool. I thought there were other nerf options that would have made him a more manageable foe than nerfing his price. Salamander hunting packs have gotten reworked. They now have less armor. They now have splash attacks against small targets, so they're going to be able to, I would assume, do more damage to blobs of infantry. And now their projectile damage did get nerfed. So yeah, we're gonna, because it's now less of it is AP and more of it is normal damage. So definitely they should be more of a versatile unit now. This doesn't help the Razordons that kind of suck, but it's a change. Ancient Salamander, more projectile damage. I don't see the point there. Croxigor's got more damage output. We already saw this in some gameplay. Plus 3 damage. It doesn't really matter too much in my opinion. A lot of their damage is wrapped up in bonus versus infantry, but you know, I don't mind it. I like my Croxigors. They're a fun unit to use. All Stegodons did get nerfed, losing 10 armor, so that's impactful. It means you're going to be able to melt them a bit easier, especially with like Rusty Airs and units like that thrown into the mix. Definitely a tangible nerf there. Those vanilla Stegodons did get a buff to cost. Feral Cold ones, now a little bit tankier, not by much. Don't expect it to be working any miracles, I don't think. But because at 24 models, you're looking at 192 more HP on the unit. Still, it is a buff, so gotta appreciate what you get. Feral Bastillodon. So this was a fix on many units here. Large entities getting now counting as large actually when they're fighting in water or trees or that sort of thing. Arc of Sotek is 50 cheaper. In my opinion, that's not fixing it. It's still trash. I don't believe it got a reworked ability, though. I might be wrong. Casting animations for Rev Crystal, that's, I guess, nice. Doesn't really matter to me too much. And, of course, reworks to a lot of the Regiments of Renown. Temple Guards also got, and this is actually one so Starshipper Guardians did get a buff to their missile block chance, which is kind of meh. Temple Guards actually got a nerf to melee attack, which I'm not a fan of. That and Red Crested Skinks going up in cost. I think both of these are a mistake. I think Temple Guard are in a decent spot already, same with Red Crested Skinks. This unit, very pricey for already, kind of, for what the performance it delivers. Temple Guard are an all-rounder, and nerfing their melee attack is, in my opinion, not necessary. They're not terrible against any unit, but they're also not excellent against any unit. So, especially given they cost 1,200, so I think it's a little unfair. Big nerfs to Wulfric's Mammoth. Good. This was needed. Yeah, -2 melee defense, plus 200 cost. Good. I think he still has rage, though. I'm not sure if it doesn't say anything about removing rage on him, but Mammoths have been nerfed across the board. War Mammoths have less HP now, less melee defense, making them a bit more vulnerable. Good. Mammoths have gotten kind of abusive in some cases, and the heroic Mammoths were just insane. They were very, very cheap for the performance they delivered. So good to see those nerfs. War Shrine did get a buff to its speed, though, which is important in my opinion, because before it was way slower than normal AS, made it basically worthless, so nice little buff there. Vanguard was added for both Chaos and Norscan Warhounds, which is nice. I think they deserve that, and definitely for the cost, they should have had it. Drop in price to Icehorn Marauders, trading off that melee defense, of course. Good change in my opinion. Marauder Hunters normalized to both being 550, I believe, off the top of my head. That's fair in my opinion. Throwing axes are basically useless right now. Javelins are very popular. The two, in my opinion, are fairly equal in performance when all things are considered. So I think this is fair. Brutes of the Hound getting an even bigger buff to melee attack. Definitely, in my opinion, improvement for them, because they're already pretty crazy. Fimir Warriors have gotten extra leadership, but they've lost a good chunk of melee attack. and they have gone up in cost. So I think that's a decent nerf. Now, granted, the leadership will make them a little sturdier at sticking around and fight. Before they were susceptible to terror routing and getting chased off that way. But they also were a bit too potent. So this will make them more of an expensive investment and hopefully reduce some of their synergies. While at the same time making them a little bit more reliable and making it so that people can't just cheese them out. Skin will getting extra charge bonus, not too relevant. Yeah. It's basically the most important thing here. Weirdly enough, they're now making it so that Skinwolf Werekin gets large into stat group when it. To be honest, I feel like the Werekin especially shouldn't get penalized in Woods, but I don't know. Skaven, of course, a bunch of their lords getting cheaper. That is nice to see. A lot of their foot lords are kind of crap. Warp fire throwers are all tankier now. I'm trying to see if the main changes here are to the Warplock Jezzails, really. Stormman Halberds got another round of buffs. I think they deserved it. Council Guard getting an increase in cost. Not the end of the world. I think they probably deserved it. Plagueborn Sister Bears getting cheaper, in my opinion, a good change. I'm still not a fan of the unit. I don't think it's particularly great, but you know, I'll take it. Poison Wind Globes getting buffed again. I wish they had more projectile velocity still. I feel like now they're going to be even more abusive. For those of you who perhaps saw my recent replay against Dav, you saw that they melt face against certain units. I don't think they deserve this sort of buff, and it's going to make them disgusting against some units and factions, but hey, I'll take it. When I play Skaven, I like using Poison Wind Globes, so I'll get it. Warplock Jezzail's got a straight nerf, though. Less melee defense, less calibration area, so they're less accurate. Their projectile range is lower. This should allow much more counterplay now. They should be less of a direct counter to artillery now. Natty Boobas are also more expensive. I think this was expected. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan. I would have liked to see some reworking of Jezzail's function rather than a straight nerf, because I feel like Jezzails aren't necessarily OP. It's just they're stupidly powerful against specific targets, most notably artillery, which forces your opponent to play a certain way against you. And some of you guys may be saying, oh, but that's OP. But the thing is, Skaven against a Rush, for example, against many factions, were not really that strong. You could rush Skaven down, and Jezzails, because they're trash DPS, weren't going to save you. But it did force your opponents into specific playstyle, which is unfun, in my opinion. And I can understand why the nerf was made, but I wish it had come with some compensation. For the Tomb Kings, a whole bunch of price drops again. Nothing crazy there. You bring most of them mounted anyway. Netcorn Horsemen did get nerfed, though. Less melee defense and less mass. Probably deserve a nerf. Necropolis Knights both getting a buff to their damage output as well as their melee defense. And more charge bonus than normal Necropolis Knights. Deserved buff, in my opinion. These units were not particularly great. Sphinx of Usef got more melee attack. Hopefully helps it in some of its matchups. Carrion more pricey. I'm not sure that's fair. They already got a nerf to price, so this might be a bit much. But Carrion are good, but not that good. But I don't know. Maybe some people who play Tomb Kings more than I do have some input on that. Less Legion of Demonetization got cheaper, which is nice. I kind of wish normal Skeleton Archers got a little cheaper. Skeleton Spears will now attack faster and have more bonus for large, which is definitely a buff. And an undeserved buff, in my opinion, for a unit that's already very popular. Kepler Guard now has much better melee defense and better melee attack. They did lose some damage output, but now have bonus for infantry. So they're going to be a more specialized anchor unit, and I could see them getting buffed through that. Sepulchral Stalkers, more ammo, and not really fixing them. I kind of wish they actually stalked. That would be nice. Chosen the Gods, not much. They're more expensive, is in my opinion, very undeserved. The unit is about right for the price. Casco Souls, more projectiles per volley. A decent buff, I think. It's an okay unit, but could use a little help. For the Vampire Coast, Rotting Leviathan getting a slight buff to damage output. Bloody Reaver Depth Guard, or Depth Guard in general, getting more melee, HP per unit. This is kind of what I had suggested myself, and I know a lot of people suggested and thought was a good idea. So definitely, I think it's a move in the right direction. Giving him more health per entity. That's, in this case, it's going to be 180 more HP for the unit. Makes him a little better. Bloated Corpse also got cheaper, which is definitely the move in the right direction. Queen Bess needs an HP rework, and it hasn't happened, so she's still going to be very niche, kind of borderline trash. Many of these units took what is effectively a straight nerf due to the losses of due to the loss of melee defense. So we'll definitely see. Zombie deckhands mobs losing 5 health per entity. That is pretty insane. I'm not sure what their base HP right now is. I think it's like 8,000, but this means they're gonna, because there's 120 models in each unit, so you're gonna be looking at 600 at a drop of 600 HP for the entire unit, and less leadership, so they crumble more easily. That is a huge nerf. It might actually be a bit much. We'll see, but I could see that being a bit much. Deck Chopper handguns going up in cost. I do think that like it was a warranted nerf. Zombie Pirate deckhand mobs were still a bit too much to deal with for some factions, but this is insane. Shade Wraith Gunners, yeah, nerfed. At least bombers are cheaper, but they still suck, so yeah, 50 gold, nothing. Vampire counts, all cheaper on foot. We expected that. Nothing fancy there. Wraiths getting more melee attack and leadership. Chillgeist especially getting +5 melee attack and 2 leadership is pretty insane. That's going to be a big, big boost. Skeleton Spears, a little more bonus versus large. Crypt Horrors, more melee attack. Definitely nice to see. Sternsmen got a nerf there because they lose some holding power, which is kind of what we bring them for. Some of the more glass cannon units, perhaps gaining a little bit. Claw of Nagash can be a bit more susceptible to damage with loss of melee defense. But by and large, I think these buffs are decent. Like, Vampire Guns didn't need much tweaking, so help with the Geists and the Crypt Horrors and the Wraiths is definitely a good idea. Warriors of Chaos, once again, that whole assortment of Footlords getting changed. Dragon Ogres getting more armor, which is surprising, but honestly fair. The unit is very, very flimsy, and going up to 55 armor is not going to make him crazy, but will make him at least a little less susceptible to, you know, cheap missile play and a little heavy cav that they should be countering. Like, Knights of the Blazing Sun could kind of trash these guys in a lot of the time. Obviously, they might not win in the long run, but they can do a lot of damage on a charge. And they're a lot cheaper, so you can muck them up with, like, you could get a beautiful charge in, crush the Dragon Ogres, or do a huge blow to the Dragon Ogres with Knights of the Blazing Sun, and have a unit of handguns help them clean up. And it would just be a very brutal engagement. Swords of Chaos getting a bump in cost, which is nuts, but a huge boost to their damage output. Becoming a much more universal unit because they lost their bonus versus infantry. Because now they're going to have way more melee attack, way more AP damage, more melee defense, more melee damage. They're just an overall much stronger unit, so definitely cool to see. Though I'm not sure the cost increase is actually warranted. The unit right now is basically never seen. Now it might be seen, but still, I don't know if it's deserved. Chaos Knights going up with AP damage and melee damage. I think this is an undeserved buff. I actually like Chaos Knights a lot and use them a lot. But, you know, I'll enjoy it. I'll definitely take advantage of it. Giants and Spawn going down in cost. Definitely a nice buff. Weird Spawn not going down in cost, surprisingly, though. Makes sense because the Weird Spawn with Armor Sundering is somewhat valuable. And Vanguard added to Hound's definitely going to help Chaos disrupt backlines a little bit. And Sarthroil getting less missile resist, which is definitely a nerf. 10% damage, you know. That's going to make him a bit more vulnerable. Normally he only takes 40% of missile damage. Now he's going to take 10%. Now he's going to take 50%. That's a tangible increase in damage output against him. It's going to make him more vulnerable. Orion gained Vanguard, which many have been arguing for, so definitely cool to see. Obviously with cost nerf, but it's acceptable. It's going to be cool to have a fear and terror causing fast, unbreakable lord being vanguarded. Durthu getting more armor. Actually, all Treemen getting more armor. And the Ancient Treemen getting cheaper. Branch Wraith got immunity psychology, which is great to see. Also going down in cost. Glade Lord on foot. Glade Lord's going down in cost on foot. Spellsinger on Steed getting more expensive. I think that's unnecessary. Waystalker minus 100 cost. This is ridiculous in my opinion. Very much not a fan of this because the Waystalker is already a very cost-effective unit. Going down in cost further is just, and 100 cost of that is just nuts. I know they were going for this foot hero and Lord buffage, but this is a bit much in my opinion. Wild Hunters did get a buff, got 13 bonus versus large, 50 cost increase, more attack, have magical attacks, and Lost Guardian. Now this, in my opinion, is a direct choice. Is a choice meant to directly counter High Elves and Bretonnia. Because magical attacks bypass the physical resist on those units, bonus versus large, to deal with the heavy cav that tends to dominate these matchups. Like, the matches, if your opponent spams heavy cav, as especially Bretonnia, and you don't happen to luck out with a tree map, you are screwed. Well, you are getting run down as the Wood Elves. If you don't have a map where you can camp in a wood. So this, in my opinion, is going to be a big, big boost. hopefully, at least shake things up in the match a little bit. Weight Watchers getting nerfs to cost as well as survivability. I kind of wish they got a compensating buff to melee attack. Because that was suggested by Lotus Moon, actually, that they should get a slight boost to melee attack and lose survivability. I would have liked to see that for Weight Watchers. A straight nerf will have to do, I think, but it would have been nice to see that. More armor on Treekin and Firebark Elders and those units, definitely a buff. Though Firebark Elders probably taking a nerf here with melee defense loss. More armor on Treekin, we discussed it. Orion got Vanguard deployment again, in case, you can double Vanguard, guys. Hawk Riders have bigger entities now, and supposedly they fire the first volley faster, which is nice. Glad Riders, more leadership, not too important. Wildwood Rangers did get a rework, less damage output. This is going to drop them from, I believe, 48 to just 40, but they're going to be much faster, have higher charge speed, and they're going to lose 100 cost. So they're going to be much cheaper. This could be a big shakeup for especially the Dwarf matchup, having a little slightly more survivable front line like that, or a slightly cheaper and faster front line like that with great weapons. Even though you do lose some damage output, it could still be valuable. Wardens of Cithrall, going down cost. Thank you. They didn't need that nerf. I think they deserved it. Plus losing melee defense, of course, is going to hurt them a bit. War Dancers with dual swords, gaining melee defense and losing attack. I don't know why this is necessary, given that they have a dance that specifically gives them more melee defense. Kind of undermines the point of said dance, but it's something. Low Strictures, losing melee defense and gaining attack. I think that's a straight nerf despite the cost decrease. Could have given them a bigger cost decrease, really. And yeah, that's it for the changes there. Definitely some cool stuff, some questionable stuff, some pretty crappy stuff like the Flame Cannon change. But by and large, I think it's on the right track. And I do like what's... I feel like a lot of these buffs and changes, especially to the Footlords, are in response to community feedback. And that's something I'm really appreciating. That CA is going out there, and it feels like a lot of these suggestions are things that have been suggested or thrown around by the community. Obviously, there's a few outliers here and there. The Flame Cannon or the Waystalker change, stuff like that, I haven't really seen recommended. But many of these changes are ones I've seen repeatedly asked for on the forums. And it's very cool to see CA stepping in and taking that advice. In fixes, even if they have their own internal statistics and decision making, it's still cool that I feel like they are taking our advice in some cases. Now, there have now been changes made to summons. They have different 3 phases: blue for stable, orange for weak, red for critical. Deliverance of Ita was nerfed significantly, getting more expensive in power cost, and it'll do less damage. Some of these are campaign abilities, like Shadows of Anlek, but Fiery Convocation now deals much more damage, so hopefully makes it valuable. Pestilent Breath, less damage. Wind Blast, less damage. Less damage on Wind Blast upgrade as well. Exorcism got changed to an AoE, or to a map-wide immunity psychology and 4 leadership whenever you cast. In my opinion, a good buff because it makes it a viable spell no matter matchup. Bestial Surge, nerfed to only grant 5% vigor. Plague Rash, which did the inverse, now only removes 5% vigor. Definitely a good nerf. Sunfang does less damage, so a bit surprising. I felt Sunfang was one of Tyrion's few redeeming qualities, so I think that's unnecessary. Soulfire, projectile damage. I believe this is swapped. It should be 1 to 26. It now does significantly more damage than it did before, but the explosion damage doesn't affect allies, and the spell no longer grants magic resist. So this is going to make it a much fightier ability. It's much more about doing damage. It makes it also less of a niche hard counter. Like in the Bretonnian matchup, Soulfire could really screw with Grail Knights. Now it's not going to do that. It'll nuke the Grail Knights. It'll do a lot of damage to them, but at least the Bretonnian player can make use of Grail Knights without feeling screwed. Divine Power increases miscast map wide, definitely a good buff. Fireball doing less damage, good nerf. Fireball's been a bit oppressive. And now penetrates less, so I think that's all in all good. Liber Bubonicus, reduced damage chance, 10% reduction, I believe. I believe this 0.1 represents a reduction of 10% in damage chance. This is going to nerf these direct damage spells quite a bit. It means that I think you're going to be less likely to actually kill cavalry models with these spells. It also means you're going to be doing less damage to enemy lords. So, that's a significant nerf to all of these spells. And I think it's a warranted one. Warpstone Armor now does less DPS, significantly less, half. Rune of Wrath and Ruin. This is something this is a change I'm very much not a fan of. Increased duration, whatever. But it no longer does damage, but it's now a 72% snare. that also affects charge speed. This obviously makes the foot units that Rune of Wrath and Rune would normally bully a little less susceptible. But dwarves don't necessarily have that many issues with those to begin with. But it's going to give the dwarves a massive hard counter to enemy cav play, chariot play, monster play, and that sort of thing. And obviously, in some cases, those units abuse the dwarves, but stacked on some of the mass buffs for the lords, the ability for a lot of their lords to repel enemy charges much better, the buffs to crossbow damage, stuff like that. And I feel like this is just going to make dwarves abusive. It also has a 200 meters range, which is nuts. You can snare your opponent way out at max range, gun them to bits, and yeah, I'm just not a fan of this. Granted, I wasn't a fan of the previous Rune of Wrath and Rune either. In a quick match where you can bring 3 of them, it's very abusive. I will grant the fact that at least now you can't stack them. And in tourneys, it might be a little less of an issue since it won't affect infantry. But still, I'm not a fan of it because it's going to be a brutal combo to deal with factions that rely on cav and monsters, and many factions do. Not every faction is high elves that can just pile into your face with swordmasters and white lions. And I know people don't mobile chariots in that matchup, which are really frustrating for dwarves to deal with. But not every faction can run infantry into dwarves. And this is going to be tough to deal with. Doombolt's getting a buff to projectile effect or area effect. Dread 13th now does more damage. Hopefully a good buff. I don't really use this spell, so hopefully it's better. Gyrocopter bombs do more damage. Definitely a good buff. Comet of Cassandra more damage. So buffs across the board for spells that were not popular. Giver of Glory, huge buff. Now it only has max 3 uses, but grants leadership, longer duration, and more melee attack. So this is potential to buff a specific unit to just be brutal in melee and do stupid amounts of damage. Summons have had changes. Spiteful Shot or Lord of Undeath, plus 40 seconds summon duration. I do believe this is Krell. Lasts longer. Spider Hatchlings last less. Not too important in my opinion. Occam's Mind Razor, buffed. Cloak of Mist and Shadows, buffed. Fists of Gork, buffed. A whole bunch of buffs across the board. Some less popular spells. Gaze of Nagash made a little cheaper. It's still not going to be great in my opinion. The stealth spells like Night Shroud getting a little cheaper. Nice buff. Dwellers Below getting buffed, getting cheaper. That's nice to see. Awakening of the Wood a little cheaper. Just a bunch of unpopular spells getting buffed, which is nice to see. Like that's what you really want to see in my opinion. Hand of Glory upgraded and no longer grants more speed, and now it gives plus 60 reload skill. This should make some units shoot insanely fast. Stone Shaper, which is the buff from the Necrotech, grants more armor now. That's kind of cool. Dragon Slayer's Fang. Mask of the Heavens from 18 to 23. More buffs on abilities that buff armor. Now again, grant more armor. Or debuff armor more. Dark Mail. It's got slightly buffed. It still sucks in my opinion. How many eyes? I'm not even sure what character this is on because I've legitimately never used it. You know, I play this game a lot. I have thousands of hours on 2 Warhammers. I've legitimately never seen the Helm of Many Eyes. I don't know if this is maybe it's a campaign item because I don't remember it from multiplayer at all. Tone of Rust, little less armor. That's kind of pathetic. It's -7. Who cares? Strength of the Land. And Twisted Flesh. These are obviously campaign buffs, so I guess that is probably what it is. It's probably a campaign item. And these all grant more armor now, which is cool. Feathertoe Torque slightly better now. Bloodgreed got reworked. We discussed this earlier. Kind of cool. Removes speed bonus, but increases leadership bonus. It also now only works in melee, so in some ways it's a side grade for the Minotaurs. In some ways they'll be better, in some ways a little worse. In general, I think it is a buff. Potion of Troy now has max 4 uses. I think that's a fair nerf to tech list. He's been a bit frustrating to deal with sometimes. Shield of Chaka also now has limited uses. It's the Regiment of Renown. Spearman. And then finally we do have a whole lineup of changes made for modders, and shout out to the modders, and definitely props to them. The modding community is obviously great in this game, and they've added a lot of content that CA adds much later or still hasn't added. But regardless, there's a lot to cover here and a lot to unpack. Many of these changes I think are great. I very much like what CA is trying to do with making Footlords more viable. I am not a fan of some of these upgrades. the flame cannon change in particular, I think it's abysmal. I do like the attempt to differentiate crossbows more. I think it's cool. I think the changes to the high tier cav for some factions were a bit unnecessary. I didn't think the buffs were necessary there, and there are still many units I think that remain overlooked and could still use some buffage. But by and large, I definitely am pleased with this patch. On the campaign level, I think this patch is amazing. And I don't just say this as an Empire fanboy. I mean, for real, the amount of content we're getting is huge. And it's really rather exciting. And yeah, I'm just hyped. I can't wait to see all the new Empire stuff, and I'm definitely going to be immediately jumping into an Empire campaign. I'm not even sure if I'll be doing Marcus Wolfhard immediately, to be honest. Might actually knock out my boy Balthasar Gelt at some point, because he's just so much fun. And he was fun before, now he's going to be even more fun. But either way, definitely a lot of changes made. Some, I think, might have been a little unnecessary. Carl Franz, for example, getting cheaper on a horse. I do. One thing I'm a little dubious or a little, in general, full of questions on is the changes to the chevrons. That's one critique I kind of would have. It helps a few offensive units quite a bit, but in many cases, the defensive regiments of renown get a straight nerf. Shooting regiments of renown get a straight nerf, essentially, and there's no compensation. We're not getting a cost compensation for this, and I think in many cases it's a bit unfair, because that's like one of the reasons you bring these units is those. And I understand that CA doesn't want them to be like too abusive, but at the same time, many of these units aren't busted to begin with, like the Grey or the Handmaidens or the Everqueen's Court Guard or units like that. They're not necessarily busted to begin with. So the fact that they're not getting, some compensation for a drop in one of their most crucial stats is, in my opinion, a bit unfair. But that is that. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you found it informative and entertaining. I will be leaving all the links down below. If you have any comments, critique, questions, your own take on the patch, be sure to share it. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say and to see what you guys have to say. Always interesting to see people's takes. For example, I think the high elves here are getting a bit shafted, but maybe some of you guys disagree. Yeah, be sure to let me know your thoughts and comments down below, and I will respond as soon as I can. I do thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.